Dora Laura is forthcoming from Salmon Poetry. Larissa's poetry albums are The No Net World and Exorcism, for which he won the New Century Best Spoken Word Album Award. Tracks are available from iTunes and most digital distributors. Larissa's work has appeared in the anthologies Measure for Measure, an anthology of poetic meters from Penguin, Words for the Wedding, also from Penguin, Contemporary Russian Poetry, Resist Much, Obey Little, Poems for the Inaugural from Spite and Dibble, and Choice Words, Writers on Abortion, and many others. Larissa is the original English language translator of the first futurist opera, Victory of the Sun, performed at the Los Angeles Country Museum of Art, the Garage Museum of Moscow, the Brooklyn Academy of Music, and theaters and universities worldwide. Larissa also edited the anthology 21st Century Russian Poetry from Big Bridge Press, and has been a translator on the Russian Bible for the Eugene A. Nida Institute for Biblical Scholarship of the American Bible Society. Larissa's mission in life is to help mentally ill people through her writing and through writing in general. Please see more about Larissa at her website, www.larissashmilo.com. Thank you.
Thank you so much for that intro, Mark. Before I'm going to read a translation from Alexander Sergeyevich Pushkin today, but before I do and have your attention, I'd like to tell you about our upcoming shows. We have the 100,000 Poets for Change open mic next Saturday, the 19th. That is going to be fabulous. There are very few slots left, so grab a slot if you want. Today's open mic, unfortunately, is closed. We have wonderful readers, but we don't have room for any more readers on the open mic. On the 26th, we have Bob Holman, Janet Hamill, and Maureen Owen. So you definitely don't want to miss that. And I would like to tell you about save the dates, October 10th, October 17th, and October 24th. We're having a Lit Balm Zoomathon. We're having a poetry fundraiser for the Democrats, all three of those nights, star-studded, no holds bar. It will be fantastic. Please mark your calendars and come ready to donate. Any amount is good, but try to be generous. It's important. It's a very important election. So mark your calendars for October 10th, October 17th, and October 24th. Superstar poets and no holds barred fun. It will be wonderful. Please join us. And now, without further ado, I am going to read a translation from Alexander Sergeyevich Pushkin. There's a little snark at the end, which I hope I've captured. It's a love poem. I loved you once, and this love still, it may be, is not extinguished fully in my soul. But let's no longer have this love dismay you. To trouble you is not my wish at all. I loved you once quite wordlessly without hope. Tortured shyness, jealous rage I bore. I loved you once so gently and sincerely. God grant another love you thus once more. Thank you very much. I'm now going to introduce my splendid co-host, Jonathan Penton. In 1998, Jonathan Penton founded unlikelystories.org, which has been running as a continuously updated web magazine since then. Unlikely Stories spawned a daughter company, Unlikely Books, which publishes 3 to 5 excellent, wonderful, fantastic poetry books per year. Jonathan has lent editorial and management assistance to a number of literary and artistic ventures, such as the New Orleans Poetry Festival, Mad Hat Inc., and Big Bridge. He has organized literary performances in places like Alabama, Arkansas, California, Chihuahua, Colorado, Florida, Georgia, Illinois, Louisiana, Massachusetts, New Mexico, New York, North Carolina, Ohio, Texas, and Washington State and DC. His poetry chaps are Last Chap from Virgin Press, Blood and Salsa and Painting Rust, Unlikely Books, Prosthetic Gods, New Sins Press, Winged City Chapbooks, and Standards of Sedity, which is from Litfest Press, and the free e-chap backstories from Jeffrey Side's Argus ebooks, which you can download for free. So please do that. Jonathan, please take it away.
Thank you, Larissa. So most weeks, rather than read my own work, since I'm not very prolific, I read something we published in the past week at unlikelystories.org. And this week I have a translation by Susanna Peramantoni. She wrote this in the Hungarian and then translated into English herself. It's called Stages. Again, it's by Susanna Peramantoni, and it's up at www.unlikelystories.org. 1. I switched from the tablet to my iPhone. I waved at a friend I just added. He is sitting on a race car in a royal blue suit. I'm sending virtual kisses while rearranging my wardrobe, a shift from winter to spring. My present is so fast now, yet it's constant and timeless. I'm looking into the mirror, putting makeup on my distorted self, and I'm not answering the phone because my body is a plane. It may be in spin now, and my soul is spinning as it is plowing its thunderous roads. I'm losing myself in reality now. 2. Next to me, blonde boys, almost looking the same. Greased hair, old imitations. They are talking about fashion with freakish fake girls with black hair. Some girls get on, waddling with holes in their fishnet stockings. Scary tattoos on their white skin. All together, chatting loudly, terrible. They kiss the blonde, shaved or almost shaved Dean imitators who are following them with a weary, hungover gaze. 3. They get off. The party is over. They leave their scent behind and some shiny magazines on the seats. No problem. Maybe someone will take them at the terminus to use as blankets in a dark corner of a subway station covering twisted, distinctive smells. Thank you. All right. It's time to introduce Mark Vincennes, who will read a piece and lead us into the feature. Mark Vincennes is an Anglo-Swiss poet, a fiction writer, translator, editor, publisher, designer, multi-genre artist, and musician. He has published 14 books of poetry, including more recently, Becoming the Sound of Bees, Leaning into the Infinite, The Syndicate of Water and Light, and Here Comes the Night Dust. Vincennes' newest collection, The Little Book of Earthly Desires, and a novella set in ancient China, 3 Tao's of Tao, or How to Catch a Fortuitous Elephant, are both forthcoming in 2021 from Spite and Dival. An album of music, ambience and verse, left-hand clapping, is also forthcoming from Tree Torn Records. Vincennes is a prolific translator and has translated from the German, Romanian, and French. He has published 10 books of translations, most recently Unexpected Development by award-winning Swiss poet and novelist Klaus, which was a finalist for the 2016 Cliff Becker Book Prize in Translation. His poems have been published in many journals, including The Nation, Plowshares, the Los Angeles Review, World Literature Today, Raritan, and Plume. His work has received fellowships and grants from the Swiss Arts Council, the National Endowment for the Arts, and the Witter Benner Foundation for Poetry. He's the editor and publisher of Mad Hat Press and publisher of New American Writing. He has lived all over the world, from Brazil to China to Iceland to India. He was born on the Peak in Hong Kong, but now lives in a farm in rural western Massachusetts overlooking Herman Melville's Greylock Mountain, and where there are more coyotes and bears than people. Mark, will you read us a poem today?
I will. In fact, I'll read you a poem by Klaus Mertz, who I've translated, and I know John is very familiar with. He is, shall we say, the Swiss Basho of today, very much a minimalist in his writing, and he's won many literary prizes, including the Hermann Hesse Prize for Literature, the Swiss Schiller Foundation Poetry Prize, the Hölderlin Prize. He's published over 35 books of poetry and several of fiction as well. His latest novel is The Argentinian. And I translated a collection of his verse, which was in the English is called Out of the Dust, which came out with Spite and Dival. And then I translated another collection, Unexpected Development, which came out with White Pine Press. This poem is called Heißer Friede, or Heated Satisfaction in English. So I'm going to read the German first and then the English. 1. Schon mit dem ersten Ton hängt sich ein Szenen in den Ellenbergen und zieht uns fort. Wir gleiten wie Schneen über Land, durch Städte, Auen, queren Flüsse und Geröll und träumen uns an ferne Strände. 2. Nacht bricht herein, wir reisen weiter, da hält es über einem Weiler auf, der Zug hält still und die Trompete steigt aus ihrem Führerstand, sie lädt zum Tanz, Glück wiegt uns wild für eine Weile. 3. Tiefer das Dunkel, der Himmel auch, sündlich und heiß, wir niesten uns in zarten Aschenhöhlen ein und löschen unsere Durst aus asvollen Kelchen. 4. Auf dem Perron hart morgenfrisch die Blaserkapelle, fegt uns mit voller Lunge aus der verträumten Nacht. Die Schienen blitzen locken fort, im Zelt am Bahndamm probt ein Wanderzirkus für den Nachmittag. 5. Der neue Abend blaut. Lianen senken ihren Ranken ins Herz, in unsere Magengruben. Mehr wünscht als weh, mehr Lust als Schmerz. Die Gleise lang vom Mast zu Mast spannen sich Hängematten und neue Liebe leuchtet durch die Maschen. Zwischen die Schellen wächst das Gras, verlieren sich im Sand die Eisenstränge, wir queren ferne Kontinente, so geben Zeichen und erreichen einen weißen mütterlichen Strand. Im Landesrinnen rüste man seit Tag schon zum Fest. 7. Zurück in Richtung alte Welt schreckt uns ein greller Ton, irrliche Blitzen auf, Feindseligkeit, wir spannen neue Brücken über alte Gräben. Es ist ein heißer Friede, der uns bleibt. 8. Die Bläser wollen wieder weg, sie legen Schienen in die Lüfte, heizen dem Keyboard ein, schließt die Visiere, unter den Drums beginnt es zu rumoren, dann geht es schnell und listig durch den Äther fort, im Bauch des Basses schlummert stumm der weltfahrende Aal. So that's the German. And here's the English. Heated satisfaction. 1. Already with the first twittering, a yearning hooks us through the elbows and drags us off. We glide as upon rails over land, through cities, through marshes, crossing rivers and debris, and dream ourselves to distant beaches. 2. Night breaks in. We travel on. It brightens over a hamlet. The train halts, and a trumpet rises from its driving position and invites us to dance. Joy swings us wild for a little while. 3. Deeper than dark, the sky is also southerly and hot. We nest in our tender armpits and extinguish our thirst, drinking goblets of asphodel. 4. Lungs full and anticipating us on the platform, the fresh brass band sweeps us from the dreamy night. The rail glimmer lure us away. In the tent at the railway embankment, a wandering circus is rehearsing for the afternoon. 5. The new evening turns blue. Lianas sink their tendrils into our hearts, in our stomach cavities. More wishful thinking than aching, more passion than pain. Along the tracks, hammocks suspended from mast to mast, and young love glimmers through the tracks. 6. Between the rail ties, grass grows, iron cables, we get lost in the sand. We traverse distant continents. They give us a signal and reach a white motherly beach. In the interior, they've been preparing the celebration for days. 7. A garish noise shocks us back toward the old world. Ghostly lights flare up in enmity. We hang new bridges over old graves. A heated satisfaction remains. 8. The trumpeters want us to depart again. They lay trails in the breezes. Fire up the keyboard. Lower your visors. Rumors encircle the drummers. Then we move quickly and guilefully onward through the ethers. In the guts of the upright bass, the worldly eel silently snoozes. So there's a little Klaus Mertz for you. I hope you enjoyed it. And now we move to our feature section today. First up for us to read is Alexander Dikkov. Alexander, or Alex as I call him, is an associate professor of French at Virginia Tech. He writes in English and French, and his works of poetry and prose include Appetites, which came out from my own Mad Hat Press, Rhapsodic Cursé from Louis Boutou, Trial Balloons Corrupt Press, and Carambole from Argol Edition. Forthcoming works include a collection of aphorisms on art, Deblay from Louis Boutou, and a mosaic novel of sorts, Le Premier Souper from La Volte. His translations include Clatters by Henri Druguet, Air of Solitude followed by Requiem by Gustave Roux, co-translated with Sean T. Reynolds, and The Central Laboratory by Max Jacob, forthcoming from Wakefield Press. Thank you so much for joining us, Alex.
And thank you very much, Mark, and all of you for having me. It's quite a pleasure to be here. I'm actually going to start with one of the Max Jacob poems that you just mentioned, since I've been working on this translation lately. And the person who is able to name the popular children's book that this poem sounds like will win an imaginary candy that I will send you through the interwebs magically. And this one's called The Departure. Farewell, my pond, and all my many doves upon their tower, and who kindly donned their silky plumage and its swollen loves. Farewell, pond. Farewell, my home, and all its gables blue. So many friends in every season come to see us, though from leagues away they flew. Farewell, home. Farewell, laundry. Upon a hedge it hangs. I've painted it so often near the belfry. You know it is to you that it belongs. Farewell, laundry. Farewell, wainscot, and many doors of glass. Upon the mirror floor they shined a lot with bars of white, whose colors brightly flash. Farewell, wainscot. Farewell, orchards, the cellars and the panels, and on the pond are sailboats just like birds. Our white-coiffed maid with all the flannels. Farewell, orchards. Farewell, oval river, clearest of all. Farewell, my mountain. Farewell, sweet forest. It's all of you who are my capital, and never Paris. Can anyone name the children's book that might remind you of?
Anyone? Ideas? Hand up.
Goodnight Moon.
Goodnight Moon, exactly. Right, and this came well before Goodnight Moon, but that is, of course, a poem that sounds very much like Goodnight Moon, and was interestingly pastiched or parodied, sort of, by Ron Padgett, who has an homage to Max Jacob that happens to look very much like Departures. So I'll read one more by Max Jacob, maybe a shorter one. He's a weird poet, and uses lots of rhyme, and it's a shame to translate him without using the rhyme. So I will do that. Oh, I seem to have lost my. Oh, there we go. Okay. Let's see here. Okay, this one's called Cancale, which is a city in Brittany. Twilight. Cancale, twilight. To bless the sea, the sky's gaze takes a dip. Upon the sea, the sun's a gliding ship. Each breaker has its gold, all foam its night. The swell commands the next wave to alight. The sun, it leaves behind a sun that shatters on the sand, wherever the sea dies down, holding back 100 prismed circles, flat as a mirror and green as a gown. The poplar divine and robust, the aspen light and autumn laced, the pine they seem in sync, wounded by the sunset, near to sleeping as they await returning ships in flame. Among the fanned out rocks it is a game for scarlet blushing sails and marble skiffs when they reappear to scenes still more clear. Dear Claude, here we are beneath the trees on cliffs. Your venerable father's telescope stubbornly seeks the coast, Avranches sands. On this device and on her 2 white hands, Madame the Countess closes both her eyes. You ask my fragile paintbrush that it may one day for us this memory and spirit. Today my lyre answers you and wakes it. Okay. And that one is called Concale, Twilight.
But someone in the chat is asking you, did you repeat the name of the person you're translating?
Ah, yes, absolutely. That's Max Jacob from the Central Laboratory. A parody in The Wire? Oh, there's a Goodnight Moon parody in The Wire, I suppose, rather than a departure by Max Jacob, I assume. I'm looking at the chat here. Okay, I'll read a few of my own pieces, and please, Mark, stop me if I overdo it time-wise. I don't want to cut anyone else short, so and I lose track of time when I'm reading. So this one's called Secret de Polichinelle. I'm going to read the French version first, since this particular one was written in French first, and then I'll read the English version, which appears in Appetites from Mad Hat. Secret de Polichinelle. J'ai une idée derrière le cœur. Ah, cacher ma Valda, un moment dans l'autre, et j'aurai mon fin jour, tout dire et me taire en douce, à ciel ouvert, un as dans la manche. Je cache à tout moment ce coup de candeur, c'est une question pour quand. D'un instant ou l'autre, tout peut bousculer, partir par vrille, tout peut filer en pique et couler à tout va, tout chavirer, le cœur sur la main. And the English version is in here somewhere. Oh, it looks like I forgot to. Okay, give me just a moment. I'll just read the French version of that one since it'll take me too long to find the English version. And I don't have the book in my hand right now.
You read beautifully in French anyway, Alex. So
Thank you, I appreciate it. That one does appear in Appetites in any event. If you want to see the English version, now, Secret de Polichinelle is a secret that everyone knows. So the English version of the poem is called Open Secret. So this one I will read in the English version first. It's called Of All Things a Newborn Copy, and it's sort of a painterly allegory, if you like. This lower left-hand corner marks the best of spot as any for begin, and let the canvas dazed and panic trace across my stinging brush, for spill precision over lines who cloud the edge's slender depths. Nail down the stern line sorrow here, despite the footholds dim along this cross-hatched distance, where each mute outline severs one another, where intersections blend apart like lips or lives. Now upon I'm nearly through this end, in spite where features not quite show, I'll fill the thinnest hints in after. A few shy contours left are waited for conclusion, a final missing hue, a far cry. And there's more enough aside for further drawing out above and boundless bare beyond whatever's now remained upon my raw and vivid sketch of all things a newborn copy. As you can see, I do funny things with syntax and have a lot of fun with that. I'll read a long dramatic piece that I've been writing, which includes a lot of different forms in it, including metered forms. And this one's called "Here We Go Round the Mulberry Bush." And I'll do another quiz. We can see who knows what mythical material this happens to come from.
The running around the mulberry bush one.
No, the content of this poem is it's part of a narrative poem, book-length narrative poem. So if you can recognize the intertext, you're ahead of the game, I suppose. So there's a pair of lovers named Anna and Aviv, and a fellow, a meddler, an interloper named Hob, who disguises himself. And here Hob has disguised himself as a lion. At the fountain and the mulberry tree, Hob, still disguised as the preposterous lion, hides behind the tree and watches as Anna enters. This is Hob. Here comes Anna, betattered but alive, who knows how crept out of custody, perhaps with coaxing and identity, or tempting counterfeit distress to drive imprudent guards to peep the door around, or clamber down a window in disguise, or dig a tunnel through the rock. Surprise! Here comes Anna in a hole of the ground. Whichever way it was, arrives Anna, and sees the fountain and the tree. Aha! And tiptoes near for tipple swigs, and wait till lovers shall their eyeballs rub again upon each other. But I'll shook my mane, and they'll be given each their grisly fate. Hob disappears behind the tree. Anna begins to bathe beneath the fountain's falling waters, letting clothes fall to the ground. This is Anna. I feel inside the still and moving spray anticipation of a countless bloom. As long as minutes all the days consume, as vivid as the market time display of rippling bolts of calico in rows. Unravel me forever like your thirst. Dive in time for endlessness, head first, and drink the avid movement we'll compose, recycled from the restless flux, like coins plucked out and thrown back in to join the same invariable wish, to meet simply and in faith, and not to be alone, and to combine and to agree, to touch and intertwine, to feel complete. Obviously, Anna is imagining the encounter with Aviv. Hob appears with a phony roar. The mouth of his costume is splattered with still wet red paint. He seizes Anna's clothes and shakes them between his jaws, splattering them with paint. Hob drops the clothing, still roaring. Below, we have translated Hob's counterfeit bluster. And this is Hob again. Nefarious intruder, be the garb I ribbon down by gory tooth and maw. To you I'll sharply daunt with sudden claw by dole out shreds, and kill by nimble barb for crimes invading super private zones, upsetting and disturb the stomping grounds, for falsely crossing into out of bounds. I'll ruthless eat and bite upon your bones. Ever so much souls I have extinguished, and so strongly buccaneers I've vanquished, that crossing with myself would be insane and fool-worthy indeed. Turn backward, brute, and far remove you and your birthday suit, or else you will ferociously be slain. And Anna responds ferociously. What animal would ever dare to try and block me on my hurtle forward way, or drive this passion anywhere astray from its inevitable track? I'd pry my desperation even from your jaws, and reach inside to snatch back out the dreams and hopes you swallowed, and at the seams I'd burst you open like a plum, and pause to feast upon your disappointed flesh, and boil all your bones for lion soup, to take my lover's errand up afresh. You'd best hot-tail it out and scram the coop, you oathsome, callous, and unstalwart goon, you quiver-bellied boob, you fat baboon. Yelping, Hob flees before the furious Anna. And Anna and Aviv are, let's see if anyone managed to guess this. The Ramayana, nice, interesting. Pyramus and Thisbe is the one. That's the one. Porky's. I don't know what Porky's is, but I love the answers here.
Isn't Porky's a movie sort of from the 80s or something like that?
Well, Pyramus and Thisbe has all kinds of versions of it. Of course, Romeo and Juliet being one of the versions of Pyramus and Thisbe or inspired by Pyramus and Thisbe. So perhaps Porky's is likewise playing with Pyramus and Thisbe. I have no idea. I don't know Porky's.
You gotta watch it. You gotta watch it. It's amazing.
Okay, I'll take a look for sure. Okay, shall I read another one, or shall we move on to the next reader?
I think probably we should move on to the next reader at this stage, if you're right with that.
Sounds good. I'm looking forward to it.
Since John is sitting over there en Angers, and I think he's finished his daily quotient of Cabernet Sauvignon probably as well, right?
So I missed that. I was trying to find my microphone to turn on.
I said by 11:30, you probably finished your daily quotient of Cabernet Sauvignon.
No, I decided not to drink any wine today.
I see.
This evening.
How are the grapes this year, by the way?
How are the grapes this year?
Yeah.
There wasn't enough rain in just the end of the spring and the early part of the summer, and then, as you probably know, it didn't rain for about 2 months here.
Right.
So this is a wine growing region, but I think the wine will probably be too concentrated and too heavy.
Gotcha. So it looks like sherry for a while, right? Please, let me introduce John Taylor. John was born in Des Moines. He's lived in Europe since the mid-70s. After settling in Paris in 1977, living there for 10 years, he moved to Angers in the Lower Loire Valley, where he still lives. His most recent books of poetry are Grassy Stairways from Mad Hat Press and Remembrance of Water and 25 Trees, the Bitter Oleander Press. Both books resulted from the collaborative projects with the French artist Caroline François Rubineau. In 1929, he published a double book with the Swiss poet Pierre Chapuis, a notebook of clouds and a notebook of ridges from the Fourth Nightly Review Press. A notebook of clouds was an earlier book written in French by Chapuis and then translated by Taylor into English. While translating Chapuis's book, Taylor wrote his notebook of ridges in an attempt to delve into a central image, the ridge that had informed his own writing from the onset. The double book is thus also a dialogue and a tribute to Chapuis. As a literary critic, John has been a bridge between European literature and English-speaking countries for many years, beginning in the 80s, and, for example, extending through 2015. He was a regular contributor to the Times Literary Supplement in London, usually writing about French contemporary poetry and fiction. He wrote the Poetry Today column about foreign poetry and translation in the Antioch Review from 2004 through last year. His essays about French literature in particular and about European literature in general have been collected in 5 volumes at Transaction Publishers. John also translates modern Greek, Italian, but especially French poetry. His most recent translations are 2 books by the Italian poet Franca Mancinelli. Is that correct? Mancinelli?
Mancinelli.
The Little Book of Passage from the Bitter Oleander Press and At an Hour's Sleep from here. And 2 books by Philippe Jacotet, A Calm Fire and Other Travel Writings from Seagull Books, and Patches of Sunlight or of Shadow, also from Seagull. Coyote Arts has just reissued his 1992 translations of the stories of the Greek writer Elias Papadimitriakopoulos, Toothpaste with Chlorophyll and Maritime Hot Baths is the title of the book. John also contributed essays and translations to the monumental anthology of Yves Bonnefoy's essays, recently published by Carcanet in the UK. In 2013, he won the Reis de Palci Translation Fellowship from the Academy of American Poets for his project to translate the poetry of Italian poet Lorenzo Calogero, a book published as An Orchid Shining in the Hand, selected poems 1932 to 1960. In 2015, his translation of José Flore Tapi's poetry, Sheds, collected poems, came out from the Bitter Oleander Press and was a finalist for the National Translation Award. Tonight, John will read from his translation of Tapie's new book, Train au Monté, which won the Prix Suisse de Littérature in 2019, the highest Swiss literary distinction, and which is forthcoming in translation from Madhat Press. Thanks, John.
Thank you very much. I'm very happy to be here because I very, very rarely go to America, unfortunately, and so I feel like I'm back home again. Not exactly in Des Moines, perhaps. But, let me tell you quickly a little bit about Josée-Flore Tapie, and because most of you, or perhaps all of you, are translators, as you know, when foreign poetry is published in English in the United States or in England, there's often sort of a miracle that takes place behind the scenes. It's an encounter between a translator and a book, and often the translator works very hard to find a publisher for the book. Foreign poetry is not necessarily commissioned by another publisher, but it's often the translator who does the hard work of tracking down a publisher. In Josée-Flore Tapie's case, there's sort of a miracle that took place as well, because as a literary critic, I had written articles about some volumes of Philippe Jacotet's correspondence that she had edited for Gallimard, and notably the correspondence with Gustave Roux, who Alexander knows, of course. I had written about Josée-Flore's editions for Gallimard, but I'd never met her, and I'd never even heard of her poetry before. But I happened to be at the translation house in Lorraine, Switzerland, and for a seminar around Philippe Jacotet's oeuvre. And Josée-Flore was invited to explain how she worked with Philippe Jacotet and also to read from her poetry. And after her reading was over, to thank her, me and the other translators of Philippe Jacotet decided to translate one of her own poems into our respective languages. And the one I chose is this one, which I will read now, which is not from her new book, but from one of her older books. Between yesterday and tomorrow, I walk on a wobbly plank raised by the light. Down below, the void, the dread of the deep, a fractured world where memory shimmers, a skylight in the black today. And this poem at the time so fascinated me that I ended up translating not only this poem, but the entire sequence from which it came. And then during the months that followed, I translated the entire book, Terre battue in French, which means beaten earth in English, which included the sequence. And from there, during the months that followed, and without initially contacting any potential publishers about the project, I ended up translating all of Josée-Flore Tapie's published books to date, a collected poems that was eventually published by the Bitter Oleander Press under the title Sheds. And some 6 years went by before Josée-Flore Tapie published a new book in French, Traces aux Montes, which, as Mark has mentioned, won the highest Swiss literary award in 2019. Traces aux Montes, what does this title mean? Traces aux Montes is a remote mountainous region in Portugal, and it means, of course, on the other side of the mountains. This isolated area is known for its poverty, sparse population, and relative primitiveness in regard to the comforts of other European regions. Through the poems, which also trace out a kind of narrative, Josée-Flore Tapie depicts a village woman who takes care of her vegetable patch, performs countless daily chores, helps out others, all the while sometimes measuring, as she puts it, an old dream from a distance, visiting it with her fingertips. You've just heard the words old dream and fingertips. Indeed, another dimension gradually emerges in this book. A fragmentary self-portrait of the poet-narrator materializes through, or is juxtaposed with, the portrait of the Portuguese woman. Tapie takes her place beside the woman, even blending with her in some passages. The images of gardening, sewing, and other household tasks associated with the woman sometimes also allude discreetly to the poet and to writing. I'll now read the opening sequence, the hallway of this new book, which, as always, in Josie Flor Tapi's work, consists of a series of short, untitled poems. Because many of you are translators, I'll add one more thing before I read. There's a technical challenge in Josie Flor Tapi's work, which often results from her subtle use of assonance and enjambments. Before reading the English translations, I'll read a couple of poems in the original to show you what I mean. I often personally try to give a semblance of the patterns of sound in her poems by using perhaps not so much assonance, our English vowels are different, but alliteration, which arguably is more natural to English language poetry. And also I use other kinds of phonetic echoes. But above all, it is the rich meaning of her verse, the intense existential issues at the heart of this book that I've tried to render in all their intricacy. So here are a couple of poems from the beginning of Le Corridor, which is the French name for the sequence, the opening sequence of her book. I'll have a little water before I begin the French. Obscur, interminable, sans lampe, derrière les vitres, la nuit. Pourtant, même elle finit par avoir faim. On l'entend qui s'agite, se retracte pour mieux fuir, soudain se sauve par les toits. Levé avant le jour, tu laves le sol en bas, forte à la tâche, l'eau, tu le jettes sur la pierre sale, tu la fais glisser, on voudrait l'éponger, mais tu vas vite, efface en hâte les marques de pas, les traces noirâtres au vent, toute porte ouverte, séchera l'humidité au vent qui passe sa serviette grasse froissée. Well, here now is the entire sequence of these short poems, which opens her book, Tras os Montes, The Hallway. Dark, endless, lampless, behind the window panes, the night. Yet even it ends up famished, can be heard fidgeting, shrinking to better flee, suddenly escaping over the rows. Up before dawn, you wash, the floor downstairs, valiant at this chore, spilling out water over the dirty stones, making it slide. We'd like to sponge it up, but you work so fast, erasing in haste the marks left by footsteps, the blackish traces in the wind, all doors wide open. The wetness will dry in the wind that wipes with its greasy, crumpled rag. On both sides already, in the growing shadow you align, the empty vases, narrow, the hallway, long like the night, an endless night, lit at the very end by the tarnished glass of the stars. When concentrating, she is unaware of our calling out to her, doesn't even raise her head when we speak to her. Nothing can distract her from her chores, the tiles below the running water, faucets to close and the eternal business of the wind, like a fireplace where nothing happens, nothing except light, and on the furniture, this fine coat of dust that glows, catches fire. Drowsy under the snow, the cabbages, the leeks, await her at the back of the vegetable patch, and those sacks, ill-closed by the cold. When she is away, it is the house, standing upright, that watches out for her with its stone eyes. But once she returns, and everything finds its place, the stairs, the bench, the shed, approach each other in turn, chairs and windows next to her, cuddle up against each other, take up their habits once again. Between the rooms, the hallways, she comes, she goes, seeking no explanation. It matters little to her that each of us, famished and noisy, sits down to eat in front of the television set. She runs to the grocery to fetch the missing milk, the instant coffee, the lemonade, the neighbor's watcher, whisper when she goes away, every day for decades now. But how can we find our bearings, not stumble constantly over the piled up laundry and the sacks every which way? The courtyard is a big misshapen mouth into which surges the shouting. Burned here and there out of negligence, the oilcloth on the table smells of smoke in the afternoon, while the light outdoors slumbers under vanilla-colored broom plants. She has always known these places, with their noises, their worries, a leaking water pipe, the laundry to fold, and the pungent smell of the kitchen. Her hands even know how to calm the invectives. For every hour its routine, a gesture she alone keeps alive. To recall this brings me peace. When I rinse the lettuce under the fern of the water, before getting the meal ready, as usual, with her I silently shift the knives and forks. With a caring hand, she picks up the cold pipes, the plates, the cups. Long we'd like to listen to her sad, slow hand moving over the table, sad or simply shy, through lack of understanding. And this very fact comforts us. Peace has no face, has 4 wooden feet and customary gestures.
Thank you so much, John. That was fantastic. We'll get back with you and Alex at the end. I have one question I'd like to pose to all our translators today. But next up, we have the illimitable Leah Graham, who is the editor of the forthcoming From the Word to the Place, the work of Michael Anania, who I believe is with us in the audience here on Zoom today, and currently translating Máquina, Ediciones Tacias by the Chilean writer Sergio Cordo McManus. She is the author of the poetry collections from the Hotel Vernon, from Salmon, and Ho and Helix and Where and Here and You and You from Hotel Books. Is that right?
Nope.
Okay, say it. Say it.
It's Hawk.
Hawk. Okay, say the whole title.
Hawk and Helix and Where and Here and You. The title that I want to kill myself for, but it's done. It's done.
And there are 4 chapbooks, Murmurations, which is forthcoming from Hot Tomato Press, and Spell to Spell from Above Ground Press, The End of the World, This End of the World, Notes to Robert Crush from Apartment 9 Press, and Calendar Girls, Above Ground Press. Leah's poems and reviews and essays and translations have appeared in numerous journals and anthologies that include the Gargoyle, the Nervous Breakdown, Plume, Arkansas Review, the Southern Humanities Review, and the Alteration of Silence, recent Chilean poetry from Lavender Ink. She's an associate professor of English at Marist College in Poughkeepsie and a native of Northwest Arkansas. Welcome, Leah, and let's hear some of your wonderful translations.
Mark, I love how you say Arkansas. That's a whole new pronunciation. All right, thank you for having me. So I'm gonna read from an anthology that I was in some years ago through Bill Lavender's press, Diálogos, that I'm assuming you all know. Anyway, The Alteration of Silence, which is was an anthology dedicated to contemporary Chilean poets. And I'll say, just to give you this, I mean, it's interesting because even though I've traveled a lot and lived in parts in Latin America, Ecuador, Dominican Republic and such, when I first started translating, my professor at the time sort of goaded me into translate. I didn't know much, so whatever, you know, it was an easy goad, right, to get me to do a new translation of Gabriela Mistral, the great Chilean poet and teacher of Pablo Neruda. And so that was a really good lesson for me. And then I put it down for a while. But anyways, someone asked me to do this some years ago. And it was great because at that time, I still had not gone to Chile, even though I was really interested in it as a country, its history and such. But because of this, I really got interested in one particular poet's work, which I'm going to start with, Sergio Codu, who I'm working on his second book, Máquina. He actually wrote me yesterday and said, I have a new book out. I think it's great. I'm going to self-publish it. And I was like, don't do that. Anyway, so, but wonderful thing about this anthology was that I got in touch with him. And I've been to Chile since and hung out with him and his wife and their kids a number of times at this point. So, well, I'll probably talk about that a little bit. So I'm going to read 3 short pieces by him. And the thing that I love about Sergio is that on one hand, he's a really cerebral guy and he's very influenced by the modernist, you know, he's done some translations of Pound and but also Robert Lowell and Delmore Schwartz. But he's also like, another part of him is, you know, super rock and roll. So I think, you know, so sometimes when I talk to him, all he wants to talk about is like Bob Dylan and stuff. So I like that swing to him. So anyway, I'm going to read you 3 short ones, first starting in Spanish, then I'll read mine. And then I'll read another Chilean poet that's a bit longer, so I'll read it in English and finish off with something by me. So Sergio Codu. One last thing that I'll mention is Sergio also, because he does translations himself, he often uses English either as titles or within the poem. You'll see a little bit of this, not a lot, but a little bit. So this first one, Minimalist Lullaby. Si se pudieran fundir las guitarras para elaborar una sinfonía sólida que dé cuenta de la sabiduría del suelo. Si el oxígeno se pudiera amasar para hacer una estatua del vacío que deviene después de cualquier acto. Si las rocas pudieran ser convertidas en canción de cuna, yo podría dormir. Si una música cualquiera sonara ahora, el pasaje sería otro. Yo sería otro. Pero la música sería siempre la misma. Minimalist Lullaby. If guitars could be fused to invent a firm symphony so that I understood the wisdom of the ground. If oxygen could be amassed, crafting a statue of emptiness that transforms after any scene. If the rocks could be turned into lullaby, I could sleep. If each music might resound now, the landscape would be other. I would be other. Mirlo. Si tuviera una corteza cerebral impermeable y las ideas resbalaran moribundas, fuera de mi cabeza podría finalmente sentarme a observar este mirlo. Blackbird. If I had a waterproof cerebral cortex and ideas might slip dying from my head, I could be able finally to sit down to observe this blackbird. The last one that I'll read by Sergio is my favorite. And I think when we begin to talk about translation, this is the one that I most think about when I think about the choices that I made and how you negotiate the other poet and yourself. Anyway, but I love this poem. Soy un hotel. Soy un hotel engalanado para recibir tus lamentos, con una habitación especialmente acomodada para desgranarme en tu presencia, y hagas de mí sublime popcorn con el fuego de tu mirada. Y así yo, como despojo en tus muelas, saborearé el rastro de tus besos. I am a hotel. I am a hotel decked out to receive your laments, with a room especially accommodated to shuck myself in your presence, and you make of me sublime popcorn with the fire of your glance. And thus I, like scraps between your molars, will savor the trace of your kisses. It was fun getting to meet him and his wife. And actually his wife told me that particular poem he wrote for her before they got married. And it was a thing that she said that made her know that he was serious. Anyway, okay, so I'm going to read a longer poem by the Chilean poet Rodrigo Morales, who I don't know personally, he's a sociologist by trade, in his profession. But I love this poem, one, for the way that it sort of it's quite different from Sergio's work. And I like both the way that it is clearly influenced by surrealism and yet also firmly grounded, even though clearly it's got a lot of dreamlike qualities to it. It's in Spanish, it's called Ella Corrales, she coral snake. A couple of minutes have passed since I knew I was going to wake up. I imagine butterflies when my hair falls out, and the colors talk of dying sometimes. You're not a girl anymore, someone yells at me in the dream, with a heavenly handkerchief in the eyes. Small signs dance at the end of the beach like an enormous clock stretched to the wind. Slight things like a shadows line above the table's center, fallen like the night before. I need a photograph to have its memory, to nail it to a rotten stick, and to have to trace your features in the cracked walls of the port. My mother repeated once and again the word moss. For her, everything was green moss. And now the poor dear appears that color. A suicide letter that writes itself from time to time in an ancient dining room with a moss green tablecloth, as if it was a note for someone who takes the garbage out each Wednesday. That pure fiction of healthy bodies, that pure literature of sickly bodies. The hand of the man spreads the bread in a bog and empties itself, looking at me, the circling hands in the water. Someone should crown me and tell me nothing is going to happen, although the illusion might not be believed and remains fixed with a stub cigarette, watching you in a horrible dance, thrashing the arrhythmia of the dream while I lie above the remains of mown grass. I drink the whole sea and spit it on a cathedral of unconscious bodies. Enough, it is 6:20 in the morning and is the hour to introduce myself. I've talked like a crazy woman, and I don't get to forget the sharp pain pounding me. I have no pain except several in the haunch of the wound. The body is a wound, and the heart isn't a body, not a wound. It is a watery raving that overflows in the humidity of your white eyes. The gray cloth that raises the calm is an effect in all of us, transposed by a knife that we know will bleed like a winter of barbs in the mirror. They say that here all continues in order. Friends keep masturbating after lunch, and mothers keep teaching how to make a bed. There are some weights that drag us down until we lose ourselves in the language. Although here the disorder supposes a small poem behind mown grass. Days exist that live together inside of us, and others leave abandoned the insides of a worn out suit. The wind caresses me, the hands like an invisible razor blade. Anyone can be my assassin tonight. Anyone who lies crying in their rooms. The last thing I want to read for you all, actually, so in doing the project with the anthology with Bill Lavender's project, I was working with one of my colleagues who's a native speaker but not a poet. And so so in the course of doing, I did other translations in that book. And one of the words that came up was, and I hope you all will laugh at this, or I'll laugh at it myself and it'll be fun, is essentia, right? Essence. And so it kept coming up in these other poems. And so I would talk to my colleague Irma and I would say, Irma, I don't know how to translate essentia. And she was like, pues, it's essence. And I was like, Irma, you cannot use essence after the Ken Starr report. My God, you know, the essence on her blue dress, you know, right? And so, and then she would say, well, then use soul. And I was like, are you kidding me? That's like Poetry 101. Don't use soul. So anyway, so we had this ongoing conversation. I think I ended up using something boring like being or something. But anyway, but that argument kept me thinking a lot in what this negotiation is, right? And so anyway, so this is one of my own, and it is definitely translated, what am I saying? It is translated to Sergio's wife, Rosario, because when I had dinner with them and I was telling them about this problem, and you'll hear Rosario in the poem, Rosario said, the word alma, which is soul in Spanish, alma, she said, I think it has a little bit of soil in it. And I found that like super interesting to think about who we are as being part of place. So you'll hear Rosario's opening in here. And so I'll end with this, which is my own poem, which is part of an ongoing project, but was also part of one of my chat books, Spell to Spell. And it's called Alma, Spanish, noun, soul, essence, life. It has a little bit of soil in it, she says, touching the tip of her finger to her tongue. The word seems, flames up, tastes like a place we've been, a place we've known. In translation, it's smoke, not the event of fire, gap and gob, nothing and everything. Damning stain to the famous blue dress, unnameable yearning to self in poems of young poets. Name of my grandmother's hometown, named, some say, for the postmaster's sweetheart. Others say, drawn from a hat. Or that of my favorite therapist, dear Alma, spelling me in that weltering landscape. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you, Leah. That was amazing.
Thanks.
And next up we have Liz Gray, or Elizabeth T. Gray Jr., who is a poet, translator, and corporate consultant. Liz's translations from classical and contemporary Persian include Wine and Prayer, 80 ghazals from the Diwan of Hafiz, and The Green Sea of Heaven, 50 ghazals from Divan-i Hafiz Shirazi, and Iran Poems of Descent, selected poems of Forgu Farokazad, translated by Liz, is forthcoming from New Directions in 2022. Sections of the Tibeto-Mongolic folk epic, The Life of King Kesar of Ling, co-translated with Dr. Sadiq Waid of the University of Kashmir, appear in Columbia University Press's Sources of Tibetan Tradition. She has published 2 books of original poetry, also the newly released, or about to be released, Salient from New Directions, and Series India from 4-Way Books in 2015. She was the founding CEO and managing partner of Conflict Management, Inc. and Alliance Management Partners, both boutique consulting firms. She serves as corporate secretary of Friends of Writers and on the board of Human Rights and Democracy in Iran, based in DC. She chaired the board of the Beloit Poetry Journal Foundation and the Iran Human Rights Documentation Center in New Haven, Connecticut. She holds a BA and a JD from Harvard University and an MFA from Warren Wilson College. She lives in New York City. Thanks so much, Liz, for joining us.
Thank you, Mark. This is not New York City in the background. I'm going to be reading from the works of Farooq Farrokhzad, probably the most famous iconoclast woman poet of modern Iran. And this is a street in North Tehran called Vali Asr Street, but I'm actually on East 81st Street in New York. Given that we really do want to have some time for the panel to talk, I'm going to leave out a poem and cut out a section and just read 3 here. Farrokhzad's work that I'm going to read tonight is largely in open form, and it ranges from passionate, love, upbeat poetry to very dark work. And so the first one is about love and beloveds. The second one is extremely dark and unique, I think, well, not unique to Iran these days. And the last one is very short. The first is called The Sun Comes Out. Look at the grief inside my eyes, how it melts drop by drop, how my dark, unruly shadow gentles in the hands of the sun. Look, all my existence crumbles. A spark devours me. It carries me to the zenith. It traps me. Look, all of the sky fills with shooting stars. You came from far, far away, from the land of perfumes and lights. Now you have placed me in a boat of ivory, of cloud, of crystal. Take me, my lovely hope. Take me to the city of poetry and passions. You drag me to the road that is strewn with stars. You seat me higher than the stars. Look, I was scorched by the stars. I became brimful of the stars of fever, like the red-colored fish. I nibbled at the stars in the pool of night. Before this, how far away our world was from these blue balconies of the sky. Now your voice reaches my ear again, the sound of angels' snowy wings. Look at how far I've come, to the Milky Way, to the infinite, to the eternal. Now that we have come to the zeniths, wash me with the wine of the waves, wrap me in the silk of your kisses, desire me in the slow-paced nights. Don't ever let me go. Don't separate me from these stars. On our road, look how the wax of night melts drop by drop. To your warm lullaby, the black goblet of my eyes becomes brimful of the wine of sleep. In the cradles of my poetry, look, you rise and the sun comes out. Earthly verses. The word for verses in this title doesn't just apply to the ordinary verses that all of us write and translate. It refers to verses of the Quran, so it means sort of holy verses. Earthly verses, as opposed to divine verses. Then the sun went cold, and bounty left the lands. And the green of the fields dried up, and the fish of the seas dried up. And after that, the soil refused to accept its dead. Night, like an uncertain image, contracted and rebelled in all the pallid windows, and in the darkness, the roads stopped going anywhere. No one thought about love anymore. No one thought about victory anymore. And no one thought about anything anymore. In the caverns of loneliness, futility was born. Blood smelled of bhang and opium. Pregnant women gave birth to headless infants, and cradles, out of shame, took refuge in graves. With those vapors of bitter poison, alcohol swamps sucked down the paralyzed crowd of intellectuals into their depths, and the slime mice in the old closet gnawed the gilded pages of the books. The sun had died. The sun had died, and the word tomorrow in the minds of children had a vague, lost meaning. They portrayed the weirdness of this worn out word in their exercise books with a large black blotch. People, the crowd of fallen people, discouraged and emaciated and dazed, burdened with their inauspicious corpses, went from an exile to another exile, and the painful desire to commit crime swelled in their hands. Sometimes a spark, a meager spark, shattered this silent and lifeless gathering. Suddenly among themselves, they fell upon one another. Men cut open one another's throats with knives and had sex in a bed of blood with prepubescent girls. They drowned in their own terror, and the fear of sin had paralyzed their blind, dull souls. And always in the execution ceremony, when the nooses pressure squeezed the spasming eyes of the condemned out from his skull, they would reflect deeply, and in their tired and old nerves twitched with lust. But always at the edges of the squares, you saw these petty criminals who stand and stare at the stubborn flowing of the fountains. And perhaps still, behind crushed eyes, in the frozen depths, one half-alive, confused thing had remained in place, which in its powerless struggle wanted to believe in the purity of the water's song. Perhaps, but what emptiness without end. The sun had died, and no one knew that the name of that sad pigeon who had flown from all hearts was Faith. Oh, imprisoned voice, won't the splendor of your despair dig a tunnel from anywhere out of this hateful night toward the light? Ah, oh, imprisoned voice, oh, last voice of all the voices. This is one of her most famous poems. It's very short. it's odd because it was both a favorite of the Empress of Iran, Farah, the wife of the Shah, and it's also a poem that prisoners tend to scrawl on the walls of Iranian prisons. It's called "The Bird is Mortal." I am depressed. I am depressed. I go out on the veranda and run my fingers across the taut skin of the night. The lamps of connection have gone out. The lamps of connection have gone out. No one will introduce me to the sun. No one will take me to the sparrow's banquet. Remember its flight, because the bird is mortal. Thank you.
Thank you, Liz. Fantastic. Jonathan, it seems to me that we have lost Larissa. Have you seen that?
Yeah, I see that. Do you want the translators to speak while I try and call her, maybe?
Yeah, absolutely. Let me continue with a Q&A with the translators.
Okay.
She appears to be back. So let's have a talk about this whole translation lark, especially since all of us are poets as well in our own rights. I think it's a very interesting proposition. Speaking, of course, from my own sort of translations and own poetry. First off, Alex or Alexander. So what's your approach? How do you begin? Do you begin with sound, the sonics, or do you begin with kind of a general sense of the meaning of where the poet is going? How do you begin?
Depends on the poem. I think some poems immediately elicit a response through their sound, and others don't. So whether I approach it in terms of what the poet is trying to transmit, meaning, or by way of its sonic texture, depends on the way the poem is constructed. Jacob's poems rely very heavily on meter and rhyme, and they use it very flexibly, but he uses it very flexibly. But that seemed to me crucial for any understanding of the verse to transmit some of that in the translations. But that's not necessarily how I go about translating other poets. So,
understand. Thank you. Thank you.
I have a question.
Sure.
Thank you. As a translator, Brodsky insisted on form. Nabokov said that you can't get fresh strawberries in translation. You can only get stewed strawberries in translation. Do you have a hierarchy of what you're willing to give up? Are you willing to give up anything? Will you struggle to maintain form and content and alliteration and poetic devices? What are your priorities as translator? I send that out to all of you.
Well, my sense is, that I learned Persian to read Hafez. And Hafez's poems, both formally and in terms of allusion and in terms of just integrating every single thing that ever came near culture and humanity, are sort of like multi-dimensional. They're tighter than sonnets. They're like multi-dimensional chess. And people say, you can't translate him into English. It doesn't work. He doesn't come into English. It's not even, it's like freeze-dried strawberries, right? It's not even stewed strawberries. So the question is, well, so what do? You don't try. You tell people, go learn classical Persian. Trust me, it will be totally worth it. Which is true. It will be. But, I started very free, sort of almost, riffing on what the original was. And I become more and more literal as the years go by. And I really will not trade off what I think a poet is saying. I want to bring what they said as close as possible to an English reader. And if that means trading off sound or rhyme or something like that, I'll make that trade. But I don't criticize people that don't, because I think every translation is a close reading. And the more, the better, as someone just said in the comments.
John, thoughts?
My turn?
Yes.
I would say that the poets that I've chosen to translate, because almost all of the books that I've translated are books that I chose to translate, tend to give such an importance to meaning, to the depth and intricacy of meaning, that if I have to make a choice, I inevitably go in that direction. I can remember a couple of exceptions to that, however. One of the poets whom I knew at the very end of his life and whom I translated is Jacques Dupin. If I remember correctly, Alexander wrote an article about my translation several years ago. And Jacques Dupin's work is a little bit different from Philippe Jacotet, Josie Flor-Tapie, Franca Mancinelli's, and some others, in that there are a lot of puns, there's a lot of wordplay. There's not, I would say that the formal aspect is not so important, but the semantics of puns is very, very important. And there were some cases where I had to make some difficult decisions, and because I knew him at the end of his life, we would talk on the phone a little bit, and he knew English quite well, so I'd explain what I was thinking about, and he'd say, well, toss a coin, you know, you have to go in one direction. One of the words which those of you who know French will appreciate is éclat, which can mean, in the case of one of his poems, it could mean either, you know, shrapnel, something that had exploded, or also the gleam of sunlight on a surface and things like that. And it was just impossible to maintain some of those puns. And so, but almost always I tend to head towards semantics, and that's also because of the types of poets that I tend to choose to translate.
Mm-hmm.
I don't have any other theory at all about translation, however. It's the text.
Leah, your thoughts?
Me?
No, Leah. Leah.
Yeah.
I think I'm gonna be somewhere between what Liz said and John said. I just think a lot. I mean, first, I think I wanted to get that literal as possible, and then go from there, right? Because and think about nuance a lot, and look into the history of the original words before I'm making my choices. And but then of course thinking about sound, right? Because I can't get away from that. But I think it's kind of a package deal, no? You know, like, it's not like I'm like, oh, I've just got to do this literally. I mean, that's a kind of first thing that I do. And then you start to make the choices about what what you're going to stick with and what you're going to give up, perhaps. But I would say.
But do you take? Sorry.
No. One last thing I would just say though is that with Spanish, I mean, at least for me, is so beautiful. And then when you're right, and not to say here we are in English, right? It's my first language, but Spanish is just so beautiful to me that when I'm reading English, it's so different that, and I'm sure that's true for everybody else here too, and in a different way, that I think if I have to sacrifice things, it's probably going to be sound, because it can't be as beautiful to me anyway as the sound of Spanish. All right, so that's my bias. Anyway, sorry, Mark, go ahead.
No. I mean, as you guys know, I translate as well, and I have different ways of translating. But I would say my primary way is, I look at the poem in German. I do kind of a fairly sort of literal translation first, and then I read the poem, 100,000 times to get the rhythm and the feel, and then I put it aside completely, and then I focus on the English language one for quite a while, and then I match them up later. So, Alex, for example, how's your process?
Once again, it depends on the poet. I mean, I suppose I find one of the reasons that translation seems difficult to theorize to me is that you never know before you start working on a text where the difficulties are going to be. Even if you've read it 20 times, you don't know that some expression is going to pose you a peculiar problem until you start diving into it. So it makes it very difficult to generalize, to my mind, what's going to pose a problem. The same goes for, John talked about translating poets that have an affinity with our own poetics. I would say that's the case of Max Jacob, but not at all of Gustave Roux in my case. Gustave Roux I translated more or less on a whim at the suggestion of the president at the time of Les Amis de Gustave Roux, the Friends of Gustave Roux. And I really loved translating this poet I had no affinity to whatsoever, and doing these grand romantic, neo-romantic periods that I didn't have the opportunity to do much in my own writing. I guess that's to say that I like to translate things that are very, very different from the other, and that therefore they each demand their own approach, I think.
That's right. I guess that's true. That's right.
So, shall we move to the open mic, Larissa?
Okay, if we're ready for the open mic, thank you. My God, let's have a huge hand, please, for Liz Gray, Leah Graham, Alexander Dickow, and John Taylor for a fabulous, absolutely fabulous, beautiful reading. Thank you. So glad we are recording these things for posterity. I am so grateful. Watch our YouTube if you want to see this again. It's wonderful. Once again, come next week. We have 100,000 poets for change, and we have 100,000 poets reading. We have a lot of people reading next week on the open mic. It will be wonderful. Please come support 100,000 Poets for Change. And on the 26th, we have Bob Holman, Maureen Owen, and Janet Hamill. That will be a great show. And don't forget to set your calendars for the Zoomathon, the Lit Balm Zoomathon to raise money for the Democrats. We must raise money for the Democrats. This is important. And we're going to have a star-studded program on the October 10th, 17th, and 24th. Please mark your calendars, and it's going to be a lot of fun. No holds barred, and some superstars have already signed up, so we're really grateful. All right, so we'll move on to our open mic. And first, I didn't see him here. Zakir Malik, are you here? Did we see Zakir Malik?
If you're here under a different name, please hit us in the chat.
I didn't think I saw him. All right, then let me bring up Bertha Rogers, who is going to read some translations of Anglo-Saxon, or one translation of Anglo-Saxon. Can we unmute Bertha?
Yeah. I'm going to read from my translation of the Anglo-Saxon riddle poems from 1,000 years ago from the Exeter book. And ordinarily I would read this and ask you to guess the answer, but it's a little awkward with Zoom. So I'm going to tell you what the answer is before I read it. This is a bagpipe. This thing makes Middle Earth different in ways gilded and glorious. I saw a creature singing in the palace. Nowhere else had I ever seen such a mortal being. She brought wildness to men's abodes. Her figure was fantastic. Her hands, her feet raised up like a shot-shouldered bird, her beak hanging earthward. She waited, eager for song in the hall, until her skill spanned. Nor could she eat, nor rise on wing, drink like men, her only dream, her art. But began she then to dance on the hand road. She is sometimes mute, storing up glory as a ghostly descant wanders her odd foot, a bounty of resonance. Her long dancing legs, how they chant miraculous mystery. She is ring-proud, jeweled yet naked, Stalwart sister singer, bearer of air, she carries her brothers, her kin on her drone neck. Let the song shaper, truth namer, tell this creature's name. Bagpipe.
Bagpipe, perfect. Thank you so much. Read these riddle poems by translated by Bertha. Bertha, what's the title? What's the title of the book?
Called Uncommon Creatures.
Uncommon Creatures. This is a wonderful collection. So definitely check that out. And thank you for coming today, Bertha. Thank you for coming today. Next up, we have Cindy Hoffman. Cindy, so glad to have you here today. Can we unmute?
Thank you very much. Can you hear me?
We sure.
Good. Well, I'm working on a series of poems called I Am the Girl. I think I have a publisher for it, if she could get into her office to publish it. And it's kind of redundant because every line starts out with I am the girl. But it's sort of channeled after Anne Waldman's Fast-Speaking Woman. So she went on for like 40 pages. And in honor of all these translations, I figured I'd read the travel version of I Am the Girl. I am the girl with the bon voyage eyes. I am the girl who is waving goodbye. I am the girl with the contraband in her backpack. I am the girl who won't take off her shoes. I am the girl who put the tower in your Eiffel. I am the girl who put the Cockney in your bollocks. I am the girl with Stockholm Syndrome. I am the girl who sold you that bridge. I live in Brooklyn. I am the girl who prays for my country. I am the girl with a boatload of baggage. I am the girl who never leaves home without it. I am the girl who never goes very far. Thank you. This was a great reading.
Thank you so much. Thank you for coming, Cindy. We appreciate having you here. Thank you very much. Next up, Big Mike, who is going to be on our Halloween show in costume. So don't miss that, October 31st. Can we unmute Big Mike, please?
Chicks, can you hear me?
We can hear you.
Chicks, sitting on a park bench beneath the ornamental Japanese cherry tree in Union Square Park, checking out all the hotties, hanging out at the great oak tree semicircle, among the derelicts, the homeless, the crackheads, heroin addicts, pillheads, methadone users, potheads, psychos, acid freaks, alkies, beggars, and panhandlers, nodding off into a drug and alcohol-fueled haze on a sunny, late spring afternoon. Crusty Kid's princess has returned from her nomadic nationwide pilgrimage to doze off into an opioid fog, hooded eyes half closed, toothless mouth half open, braided waist length, dirty blonde white girl, dreadlocks dragging the dust as she slumps forward from where she sprawls across a park bench, bare, bony, splayed legs poked forth from the same short pair of filthy black hot pants she never changes. Limbs seductively flung wide asunder in a brazen display of public invitation. Her tiny, fine facial features freckled from the unforgiving naked sun, missing molars accentuate her pale, vampire-striking cheekbones. Mama, tranny queen of the crackheads, tans her bronzed face and slowly, alluringly, rolls up the hem of her too tight pink polyester blouse, stretch across her muscular torso, exposing the bottom edge of her tiny tween girl tits, her pointy, erect nipples obscenely stretching skyward from beneath her taut top's conforming fabric whenever she catches my eye. The Madonna of Union Square Park totters on broomstick legs down the paths towards the great oak tree, crackhead skinny, her 6-month pregnant belly protruding 3 feet in front of her, with James, her man, the proud father-to-be, standing staunchly by her side. A fellow crackhead catches me checking out the hotties. Forget it, man. There's nothing for you there, bro. There's nothing for you. Forget it. Thank you.
Thank you, Big Mike. Thank you very much. Next up, we have John Wessick. Can we
Hey, okay. So this is more of a teaser for next week. reading. And it's a 10-year-old poem, and sadly it's still relevant. And I'd like to dedicate it today to every Republican senator except Mitt Romney. It's called After the Age of Heroes. The bottom line tore pages from the culture for cigarette papers. Smokers have burned through Homer, the Mahabharata, and the Declaration of Independence. Now a cancerous stench coats nose and throat with caustic film. Gilgamesh buys life insurance. Odysseus takes a cramped seat on an Amtrak bound for Ithaca, New York. Clark Kent works overtime at the Daily Planet, translating White House briefings. Arjuna lobs a plutonium softball without asking why. The Kansas School Board enrolls Thomas Paine in Bible studies. Clarence Darrow pulls 6 figures arranging corporate mergers. Hua Mulan gets a beautician's license, and Susan B. Anthony bends over tables at Hooters for $5.75 an hour plus tips. Raoul Wallenberg shrugs his shoulders and turns away. Rosa Parks moves to the back of the bus. With the last real hero, Pat Tillman, shot in the back by his own army, who will fight for justice? Captain Crunch, Colonel Sanders, the Pillsbury Doughboy. What has America been smoking? The nation coughs blood and calls the kindly physician too late. X-rays show a spot on the lung. Los Alamos scientists cut lead blocks for radiation therapy. Maybe Jesus can pull off a miracle, but he abandoned the churches long ago. Look for him in a soup kitchen, a smile for a stranger, a quarter placed in a beggar's palm, a prison door that opens to free the innocent. Thanks.
Thank you so much, John. Thank you so much. Can you guys hear me?
We can.
Yes.
Okay, last but certainly not least, one of my favorite publishers and poets, Bob Heeman.
Thank you. Okay, actually, the only language I know besides English are the line and the image, then English are the line and the image on the page. So this will have to be in English. Information, a poem without adjectives. A poem without adverbs, a poem without numbers or colors or women carrying baskets, a poem without bicycles, a poem without diagrams or windows that cannot be opened, a poem without a woman whose hair is no more than a metaphor, a poem without frogs or bears, a poem without meaning, a poem that is never old enough to cast a shadow. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Bob.
Thank you, Bob. And thank you, of
Okay,
course.
can you still hear me?
You're cutting out, Larissa.
You're breaking up, Larissa.
Breaking up, folks. Take it away, Mark. Take it away, Jonathan. Thank you, everybody. Come next week.
Thank you. Thanks so much, Alex Dikkov and John Taylor, especially hanging in there from France now at, what, 12:45 p.m. Have a nifter for us and hit the hay. And Leah Graham coming in from Poughkeepsie, New York, thank you so much. And Liz Gray from Manhattan, just down the road from Larissa, where you guys will be sharing espresso very soon, I think.
Yay!
I hope we made a tiny little dent in the thoughts about poetry and translation. Of course, there are many more things to say about it, but that will have to be another time. Thanks so much, everybody, for coming, and love to all, and stay safe, mask up, and know that Lit Balm supports Black Lives Matter.
Make Black Lives Matter. That's right. Come next week. See you then. Good night.
Is it too late to sign up for next week's open mic? You closed out already?
I think so. I'll ask Larissa in chat right after this.
Okay.
Sounds good, guys. Thanks so much again. Bye.
Good night.